Get it, Buggy. You get that past. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
In this series, we interview Dr. Carey, who specializes in medical and pediatric genetics. He has co-authored hundreds of entries for scientific journals and co-authored a book titled Medical Genetics. He is also one of the founders of the support organization for trisomy-related conditions, aka SOFT. We discuss in this series how the narrative regarding trisomy 18 is changing. Buggy, yeah. How SOFT was founded and improving informed consent for families who are expecting a baby with a diagnosis of trisomy 18. Co is practicing his sit-ups, getting big and strong.
Yeah. We also have more topics and footage from the interview that we didn't include in this video because we wanted to keep this video to about 30 minutes or less. So let us know if you guys want to see that other footage, and we'll make another video. And also stay tuned to the channel because we are conducting more interviews with different medical professionals.
Yep.
Yeah. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on this. I don't think we have to say bye, but we just lost our light, so that's the one.
We're doing it.
That's the one.
But there maybe you're going to ask this anyway if it's on tape. There is much more going on now in trisomy 18 and trisomy 13 than there was like 15 years ago. There's much more.
Oh yeah.
And it's descriptive, but the description is and the outcome research is allowing for people to know outcomes and say, okay, we really can improve outcome with cardiac surgery. We can change survival. So there is that type of descriptive research that has made a difference. I just saw a paper, the number of children with trisomy 18 that were having cardiac surgery in some of the studies that were done was about 7 to 10%. This is who have heart defects. The other 90 to 93% weren't having heart surgery for whatever reason. We choose not to do it. It's too complicated in this child. We don't do it. You know, but that number has doubled in the same database that was just published in May compared to what was published in 2017. So more children in children's hospitals in America with trisomy 18 are having cardiac surgery than they were in the last report.
That's awesome. And that is helping with the survival rate that was spoke about in the conference. Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally underestimated where cardiac surgery would fit into survival rate like 10 years ago. Mainly because I was still anchored in this idea that most children didn't end up passing away from their heart defect. But if you repaired it, they didn't pass away.
Right.
They didn't die.
Yeah.
So, but I underestimated that factor because we didn't have any data.
Right.
I mean, you know, and as I said in a recent talk, you know, just like Dr. Fauci, follow the data. If you follow the data now, there's so much more known even this year compared to what I'll call pre-2016, even though it was earlier than that. I met Chris Holliday in August of 1979. Carey was her daughter. I was the geneticist that my colleague referred her to. In our first meeting, we had a conversation that trisomy 18 was unique among a lot of the syndromes I knew because there was so little known, and the families had these challenges that
were really quite overwhelming on first glance. And Chris said something like, "You took the words out of my mouth," or I said the same thing to her. So we decided to put SOFT together. We didn't have the name then. Chris came up with the name, Support Organization for Trisomy 18 and 13. Then we added related disorders after that because of the need being there. So we incorporated in 1980 in Utah, and the first meeting was in that first summer of two kids with trisomy 13 and 5 with trisomy 18. So we had seven, and that was the beginning of SOFT. The first national meeting was 1987. In Salt Lake, we hosted it. One of our administrators in my genetics office actually helped do all the coordination with Chris and others, of course, helping. After the first meeting, which I thought was the most stirring and unique event I'd ever had as a physician, my wife attended the picnic. My son was then 2, and he came to he's now a radiology resident in Brooklyn. He came as well. I went every year after that. I've not missed a year. We had clinics in every conference except the one in Salt Lake, because we hadn't come up with. Now the ones after that we had in Salt Lake. But along the way, I would say I've never had experience like this, but what exactly am I doing? Am I leading people astray? Some of my colleagues would say, "Well, we think you're giving them false hope," which I know doesn't exist. Then I didn't quite have the same enlightenment. But I went to the meetings and I would talk to people, and I couldn't say that if you intervened, it made a difference. I didn't know. There were no data that said if you intervene, you did any better than not. And in 2003, let me make sure I have the right year. Yes, in 2003, a paper came out of 31 children with trisomy 18 who had cardiac, and 13, who had cardiac surgery in Canada and the US collected together, and 90% of them went home from the hospital. Prior to that time, the surgeons would say, unlike Down syndrome, where they were now having good outcomes in the 70s and 80s, we don't even think they'll survive. It was like that was sort of the conventional wisdom. Meantime, Ann Barnes at SOFT, a mom of Megan, passed away when she was 18, Ann, as a nurse, put together a surgery registry, and we started having kids who were having heart surgery. So by 1999, a few years before that paper, we had 28. I think 25 of them were trisomy 18, 3 of them were trisomy 13, and who had all had surgery. And I believe at the time, I'd have to go back and look, all but 2 of them went home from the hospital and survived. And most of them were still alive at the time we were putting this together. Meanwhile, the paper came out from Graham, the one I told you about, 2003. We submitted our paper to pediatrics before them, and it was rejected. I turned it around, resubmitted it, it was rejected. Again, so I thought, okay, well, we're going to have to get more data. We still haven't published that paper, but others have. That was 2003. That was an eye-opener. 2006, Dr. Kosho, my host in Japan next week, published a paper of 24 kids in Nagano Children's where he offered them full intervention, but couldn't offer them cardiac surgery. Because at that time, they didn't have a cardiac surgeon at Nagano Children's. And the cardiac surgery that followed after that hadn't occurred yet. That happened in Japan. Because Japan started with doing surgery then and continued that. So Dr. Kosho, 6 out of 24 kids, 25%, survived to a year. The median age was 160 days, 5 or 6 months. The median age in all the previous population studies was 10 days.
Right.
So now we have
And that's without cardiac surgery.
Without surgery, his intervention, being on a ventilator, staying as long as he needed, trach if he needed, go home on home ventilator, 1/4 of the kids. This was the first time that we could actually say intervention did make a difference. Prior to that, it was like, it doesn't make any difference, even if we were to do it. So that was the beginning. 2 years later, a paper appeared in Pediatrics, the premier journal for the American Academy of Pediatrics. 2 neonatologists in New York polled the New York City neonatologists. It was a few hundred, and 55% said that if a baby had trisomy 18 with a ventricular septal defect and the baby was born, they wouldn't resuscitate the baby. Now, this is a survey. This is where they're saying what they said saying what they would do. We don't know if they really would do that. But 45% said they would talk to the family and then they would make that decision in that regard. But in the discussion, Dr. McGraw said, we think that the pendulum now has moved away from the best interest of the child toward parent autonomy. And we're giving, this is my interpretation of her words, we're giving the parents too much to be involved in this decision. Meanwhile, some other papers appeared after that said, in areas of uncertainty, it is appropriate to err on the side of following the parents' wishes. So then there was that tracked through, kind of re-looking at the ethics. Then papers started to appear from Dr. Janvier and the Canadian group with other collaborators, interviewing more than 300 families of trisomy 18 and 13, who said 98% said this child changed our lives in a positive way, blessed and honored all the people around them who their lives were, and all had what we perceived as a good quality of life. I added that we perceived that. That's not even, so that was another landmark. And then in 2016, 2 papers came out, one from Canada, one from the US, months apart, that showed that survival went from 1 year survival from 5 to 6% to 15 to 17%. So about tripled.
Yes.
And didn't even sort out intervention or not, just said survival has gone up, presumably because maybe the kids are getting more operations, more hospitalizations. There have been studies suggesting that. To me, that was the press release type of event that should have occurred.
Yes.
Survival tripled in the recent population studies compared to the 10 prior to the Meyer study in the US and the Nelson study in Canada. And then the Japanese studies on CART surgery had already been published, pretty small groups, but then the 4 studies in America, including the one we did at Primary Children's, showing that survival with cardiac surgery, going home rates were 90%, and survival, to the best I could tell, for more than a year was good. Anyway, so those are the landmarks.
Yes.
That's follow the data. Oh, one last thing, then the Japanese study and the US Cincinnati study that showed that intensive intervention, including cardiac surgery, increased survival in Cincinnati to 35%, and in Japan, in Nagoya, Japan, to just over 50%.
Yes.
Compared to
phenomenal.
5% to 6%. So that's sort of the tracing of the landmarks. So that's the information that's accurate and current. And accurate meaning you interpret it, the numbers properly, and then what the challenge is, what your challenge is to help facilitate information being presented in a balanced way, rather than my view of what is quality.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Communication skills in that regard. What has appropriately been called, as you probably know, shared decision making.
Yeah.
All of this has culminated since 2016. The surgery studies saw growth under Barb, the president's leadership, now under Josh's leadership, to a new level of support that I envision happening. But then along with it is this, that I probably told you before, this philanthropic group that has funded something we're calling the Trisomy Collaborative. And this is a group that whose goal is also to educate especially the medical profession, to do studies to figure out how we educate them properly, and to again change that narrative. So that occurred near the same time I retired. Soft's growth occurred near the same time, and all of these studies have appeared. So it's pretty much, impossible for me to retire at this point.
Yeah, you're vested.
Yeah.
Where can folks find information on the Trisomy Collaborative, or is it in its
So
infancy
we don't have a
stages
website
still?
yet.
Okay.
We have an executive committee of a neonatologist, ethicist, an obstetrician who's also a mother of a 5-year-old with trisomy 18,
Awesome.
a health educator, doctorate degree who's also the mother of a child with Down syndrome, and some other leadership type people, and Ben Wilfon at Seattle Children's, who is the director of vision. Now we have another 25 people from around the U.S. and Canada who are on an advisory board, which will form into working groups around palliative care, OB, medical education, and we're going to be actually giving grants for people, not just medical people, but grants for people that can study some of these issues.
Oh, that's awesome.
Everything from, if a family needs a second opinion, how do they get that second opinion? To the question, which we talked about at the last soft meeting as a group of healthcare professionals, should we have centers of excellence in the care? Should places like Boston Children's and Ann Arbor Mott Children's be declared centers of excellence because they offer and welcome transfers, like Dr. Hamill did when he was in Omaha,
Yeah.
and was not able to work out at his next hospital.
Yeah.
So
That's exciting.
so the
That's
Trisomy Collaborative
Yeah.
does. There will be a website. Dr. Wilfon gave the keynote address at the Softs banquet this year. Certainly, if the article that you helped be a part of, hopefully that will come to fruition. The Trisomy Collaborative and SOF will have some roles in that article, which I hopefully.
You're talking about the New York Times
Yeah,
article.
yeah.
Mhm.
The New York Times, at least Commission magazine article.
Yeah.
But I had an interest in Down syndrome in 1973 when I was a pediatric resident, and I wasn't heading toward genetics. I was heading toward the field that was called care of the handicapped child. That was where I thought I was going to be going. Like doctors that took care of kids with cerebral palsy, and it all came down to one particular event, where on July 1st, 1973, a baby with Down syndrome was born, and I was in the newborn unit, and I was an intern the day before, and someone said, "Oh, the baby was born with Down syndrome. We haven't told the parents yet." So, and I did write this in an article. So I went in and I was like frightened. I mean, I don't know how to do this. I'm 26 years old. I don't know anything about this. No one taught me this, and I felt like I did a really inadequate and poor job, and I could tell they were shocked. They could barely speak. And then they got angry during the course of it. But I had whatever it was to sit there with them. And then I said, well, I'll come back and we can talk some more later. And I came back, and so we had some connection. And then I saw them in Well Baby Clinic like 2 months later, and they were like, "Come see our baby."
Yeah.
And that experience changed me as a physician. Yeah, how do you give the news? Again, balanced, without knowing the word at the time. There was almost nothing about delivering difficult news to parents in the literature at that time. Really, there was nothing.
Yeah.
That was actually what spurred me into going into genetics. Chris then was like a lot of whipped cream and icing on the cake.
Yes. That is awesome. That experience just totally directed you towards what you have done, and you're just so passionate about what you're doing. At least I get that. That's how I experience you. Is very passionate
that's
about
why I'm
this.
still working.
Yeah, I know.
3.5 years after I'm officially retired.
And I'll tell you, we are so appreciative right, Hen?
Oh,
Of crossing paths with you. I mean, it was, I don't know where we would be, honestly, without having
Well,
met you
thank you for saying that.
in soft.
It means a lot to me.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm still working, because
Well, I think there's kind of two elements of change to the narrative. Maybe the basic, most important element is early on with diagnosis, whether it's free cell DNA followed by an amniocentesis, that parents have, I call it the ABCs, accurate, balanced, and current information to make that decision for themselves. And that the information does include the challenges of medical complexity and let's say, the coupled challenges of developmental disability, but the parents make that decision. They have the information to make the decision, but to keep in mind something I didn't finish in a previous sentence, I did finish it. There are a number of kids here, a number of kids around the country with trisomy 18 that their main struggle is their developmental disability, getting the right services, rehabilitation, early intervention. It's not being in the hospital every whatever period of time, being on a home ventilator. Do you know what I mean? So not every baby with trisomy 18 has that degree. But then we're hoping, right, that every baby that does eventually will perhaps even have a tracheostomy, be off the ventilator.
Yeah.
And I know children from SOFT who are 7, 8, and 9 that's the path they went to.
Right.
Maybe I went off on a tangent again, sorry.
the current articles, the accurate articles, the balanced articles, although you have to find them. You can't say, hey, these are number 2, 3, and 4.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, other resources are, I think if one prenatally nowadays would go to a fetal center, of which almost every children's hospital in America has one, in the US, and they're also in Canada, they would have people there in maternal fetal medicine and genetics who would certainly be up to date. I would hope they would also be, they'd be current with the data.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope they would also be balanced.
Mm-hmm.
That is, because not only do you want to be current about the papers, but you want to synthesize them in such a way that you're not reflecting your own view
Right.
as, let's say, paternalistically as a physician, that you wouldn't want to put the family through this experience. You know, pure comfort care is the way to go, because then you wouldn't have to go through that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I don't think pure comfort care isn't an option, because I do, and I
Right.
support families all the time that go through it. But we want to have that discussion in a balanced way.
So
That
they
is,
could follow the ABC.
choice,
Yes.
right.
Right.
The choice of intervention, this is what it entails. There are children who don't have all of those interventions. Most of them do. Most of them need a trach. Most of them need a G-tube.
Yep.
But not everyone does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Certainly in the 80s and 90s, very few kids were on ventilators.
Mm-hmm.
Half of kids had a G-tube, but there were a lot of kids who were bottle fed. And that's at the time, around 5% of kids who survived. They survived without good quality palliative care and complex care teams and cardiologists that had the experience. Because they didn't have it, but they survived.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're still with us.
Yeah.
The kids that survive who don't need those other things. But now we know that the kids who are more medically complex, with treatment, of which cardiac surgery is definitely embedded,
Mm-hmm.
In the Japanese study, have a more than 50% chance of 1-year survival. They've been doing it longer, that's why their numbers may be higher. The Cincinnati study is 35% 1-year survival, with intervention, not necessarily in their study heart surgery. Their numbers are small, but only a few of the kids in Cincinnati actually had heart surgery. That's because they went back, their study went back to the late 2009 when surgery wasn't occurring.
Mm-hmm.
But still, with intervention, with intensive intervention, getting past those first few weeks with the need of a ventilator, survival in Cincinnati was 1-year survival was 35%,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to 5% before anything ever really occurred, And then with the 2016 studies, around 15% survival.
Sure.
Cincinnati overall 19%, but with intervention 35%.
Yes.
So numbers are small, but they're all the same direction as the Japanese data.
Accurate, balanced, current. The ABCs of early counseling when the diagnosis of trisomy 18 or 13 is made. And to me, the largest challenge is the balance. I mean, you can be accurate in the sense of portraying the figures and knowing what they are, synthesizing it properly. You can be current because you have papers that even came out in June of this year, right? You can be current and go back earlier. But the balance is the hard part. The balance is having an unbiased, open way of really allowing the parents to make the decision, but that has to assume that you've been accurate and current about what their challenges are.
Right. So really, and that goes back to the whole informed consent thing of really laying out what all of the pathways are that they could choose, what each of those pathways would entail and look like, and potentially the outcomes could be, or what the challenges could be, so that they could make an informed decision
Correct.
on what pathway they would like to choose. Whereas if you look at like even the informed consent or genetic counseling that we got was literally like, most of these babies don't make it to term. They'll likely die before they're 1. And that was it. That we had no idea that there was any other pathway for these. I mean, we just thought Co was doomed until we met you and went through SOFT and got all of that information. And then we were like, dang, this is a possibility, you know, that
Right.
we could try.
The lens of the OB in maternal fetal medicine is actually a different lens than mine might be, or that yours would be. When you have an amniocentesis, over 50% of the children will not be live born. So your experience as an OB is without even doing it, I mean, this is before you even get to a C-section decision, either pass away before 20 weeks, wouldn't that be called miscarried, or after 20 weeks and be stillborn. So they already start off thinking, well, half of it, and then they hear at birth, over 50% die in the first week of life. That means they get an amnio result by those statistics I just gave you. Less than 25% will live to a week. So you can see in some ways why they would build up a view that would result in an unbalanced presentation, because what they're not presenting, okay, if you choose to continue the pregnancy and we get to 24 weeks, well, now your chance of a pregnancy loss with a stillborn is becoming about 1/3. Well, then we go further, it's really quite small. We'll make a decision about whether we should do a C-section. If the baby's born and we resuscitate, and then your choices are this: pure comfort care, we go down that path, that's what this means. Full intervention with intensive care and option of cardiac surgery, if that is an option, then you have a 35% chance of reaching your first birthday. Once you get to that point, you see what I mean? Like you get to the point of birth, or just before birth, a C-section. We are or we're not going to have a C-section. We don't need one. In some cases, we will have one. You get there, baby's born. From that point, then intensive intervention, something in between pure comfort care.
Yeah, and when do you think would be the best time to get that balanced information for some of these
Well, I think the
families?
best time when you have a free cell DNA, non-invasive prenatal screening result back at 11 or 12 weeks of gestation, that's a screening test. You can't really do an adequate ultrasound at that time. And so you need to know what's the chance with that test that the baby's going to have trisomy 21, trisomy 18, trisomy 13, whatever it is. And for trisomy 21, it's over 95%. For trisomy 18 and 13, it's less. For trisomy 18, the numbers are going up. So it's about 60 to 80, more recent labs, 80%. That means even with the test, you don't know for sure if the baby has trisomy 18 or even less for trisomy. So then you wait for the amnio, you get the amnio. Now, at roughly 16 weeks, 17 weeks of pregnancy, you know absolutely the baby has trisomy 18. You know, and so sort of answering your question.
Yeah,
So
no, I'm tracking.
at that point, you know, even earlier, you want to have the conversation. But at that point, you want to have the conversation. Well, now we know for sure these are the figures. This is the chance of a baby continuing and being born to term. It's a little over 50%. If the baby, not term, but is born live, if the baby is born live, these are the options. I mean, that's when the conversation should be occurring.
Yeah.
But even in free cell DNA, we should be having conversations. If
Balanced
the baby,
conversations.
right,
Yes.
as opposed to, well,
Here's the
you know,
statistics from 1988,
Right.
and that's it.
Or or someone already making a decision. Maybe it might not be in Utah. A decision of, you know, the safest, easiest, most direct option would be to terminate the pregnancy. You know, in other words, to lean the conversation in that way.
Yeah. Yep. I think
That would be the imbalance.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I'm tracking. Whereas, you know, the balance from what I'm hearing you say is more of, you know, here's all the options
Yes.
and what they entail, and we're going to support you regardless of what option you choose.
Correct. That you said it very, very accurately and clearly. And then, of course, when you asked the question about people having what they can do in this circumstance, you do have to be in a place where they can offer the compassionate pediatric palliative care our hospital offers and many, many other hospitals offer. And the team that can take care of the child early on and then as time goes on. And, you know, especially having our medically complex care team that we have at Primary and other models without using any of my colleagues' names. And that is a little bit further away from, you know, one of your goals, which is to also allow people to not necessarily have to, if I understood you correctly, change their lives and move to one of the, you know, approved children's hospitals in at least, you know, the U.S. The
Yeah.
lower
Well,
48.
and a lot of them would have to because there's just not the
Yes.
care.
There's not the resources.
That's what I mean. That's what brought us to Utah,
Right.
as you know, right? And now, because you know Co is doing so well, we have the opportunity to go
Right, exactly.
to go
Have
home. But
have
we've
other
been here
options.
for shucks. It'll be a year. It'll be 1 week shy of a year when we go back to Nevada.